Today on The Explainer, we are diving deep into the story of the Order of the Solar Temple. Now, this was a group that attracted some seriously wealthy, intelligent people with the promise of, believe it or not, a cosmic journey. But that journey didn't end up among the stars. It ended in a series of absolutely horrific fires and ritualistic deaths that spanned the globe.
It's a question that just completely baffled investigators and the public. I mean, how could mayors, journalists, successful business people, how could they fall into a delusion that ended so violently? Well, to get how this all happened, we really need to unravel a mystery that starts with some truly grisly, fiery discoveries.
All right, so the whole story just explodes onto the scene in October of 1994. You've got firefighters in both Switzerland and way over in Quebec, Canada, responding to these chalets that are just engulfed in flames. But these were no accidents. Inside, they find dozens and dozens of bodies, some of them arranged in this bizarre, star-like pattern, victims of gunshots, poison, and suffocation.
The timeline is it's chilling. It all kicks off on September 30th in Quebec with the murder of a family, and get this, including their 3-month-old infant. Just days later, on October 3rd, 23 bodies are found in a burned-out chalet in Chiry, Switzerland. Then, only 2 days after that, 25 more are discovered in another fire in Salvan. Investigators were facing this terrifying question: what kind of secret society could possibly be behind an international massacre like this?
So to understand the why behind all this violence, you have to look at the who. And at the very heart of the Order of the Solar Temple were these two incredibly charismatic, but, well, dangerously manipulative founders.
On one side, you had Luc Jouret. He was the face of the whole operation. A Belgian homeopath, a really captivating public speaker who would just draw people in with his lectures on New Age topics. But the real power, the guy pulling all the strings, was Joseph Di Mambro. He was the mastermind. A French jeweler with a history of fraud, he controlled everything: the group's bizarre ideology, its finances, and every single aspect of his members' lives, all from behind the scenes.
So what in the world did these people actually believe? Well, the Order's worldview was this wild mix of, well, everything. You had myths about the Knights Templar, a dash of Rosicrucianism, and a whole lot of New Age spirituality. It all centered on one core idea: a journey to another world to escape a doomed Earth.
Their central belief, the thing that held it all together, revolved around contacting these so-called ascended masters. Di Mambro claimed that these were enlightened beings living on the star Sirius, and they were guiding humanity. The ultimate purpose for every single member was to eventually reunite with them.
Di Mambro's control was just absolute. It extended to the most intimate parts of his followers' lives through a practice he called cosmic coupling. What he'd do is break up existing marriages, declaring them cosmically incompatible, and then he would dictate new spiritually ordained pairings. And the goal of all this, to produce elite cosmic children who were supposedly going to lead a new age.
And this is what leads us to the absolute core of their deadly ideology: the transit. It was, you have to admit, a masterful piece of psychological manipulation. They completely reframed the idea of death. It wasn't an end. Oh no. It was a glorious spiritual voyage to the star Sirius, a necessary escape from an Earth they were convinced was completely doomed. This chilling line, taken right from one of their initiation rituals, just shows you how deeply this belief was embedded in their minds. Physical life, it had become totally meaningless.
But, things started to go wrong. By the early 1990s, this supposedly perfect spiritual community began to completely fall apart. Cracks started appearing in the facade, caused by pressure from both inside and out.
The whole thing unraveled in stages. First, the so-called miracles were exposed as total fakes. Turns out Di Mambro's own son revealed that the ascended masters appearing in rituals were just holographic projections. As you can imagine, this caused high-ranking members to leave and demand their money back. Then came a gun scandal. The leaders were arrested for buying illegal weapons, which brought on all this intense media scrutiny. The walls were closing in, and it was just feeding this paranoia that would soon turn absolutely deadly.
So with their whole world just collapsing around them, the leaders decided it was time. It was time to orchestrate the final transit. And this was an event that, as investigators would soon discover, was far, far from voluntary for many of the victims.
Yeah, the victims were not all willing participants. Investigators discovered the dead were divided into these horrifying categories. You had the traitors, people murdered for what was seen as betrayal. This included the Dutoit family and their infant son, who Di Mambro had actually labeled the Antichrist.
Then there were others who were helped to die by poison or suffocation or gunshot. And then finally there was a core group of believers who died by what looked like voluntary suicide.
This line, taken from one of their final letters, it just reveals their complete and total psychological break from reality. In their minds, this wasn't murder, it wasn't suicide. It was simply the next step on their cosmic journey.
The final death toll came to 74, a truly staggering number. And the tragedy, well, it didn't even end in 1994.
As you can see here, the deaths came in 3 main waves. The majority, 53 people, died in those initial massacres in 1994. But then, 16 more died in France in 1995, and that was followed by another 5 in Quebec in 1997. The really horrifying thing is that the killing continued for years, even after the founders, Jaurès and Desmembres, were already dead.
So, the fires eventually went out. The crime scenes were cleared, but the shockwaves from the Order of the Solar Temple's violent end, well, they're still felt today.
The aftermath was complicated. There was widespread public shock, especially over the fact that the victims were so highly educated. This led to a huge crackdown on so-called cults all across Europe. And yet, there was very little legal closure. The only person ever brought to trial was acquitted twice. And that failure has just fueled all these conspiracy theories about a wider cover-up ever since.
Ultimately, the story of the Solar Temple is just a dark and cautionary tale. It shows how that very human search for meaning can be hijacked by charismatic manipulators and twisted into a justification for the absolute unthinkable. It forces all of us to confront the power of belief, the incredible danger of absolute authority, and that terrifyingly, tragically thin line between faith and a deadly delusion.